At 26, Marie Bennett had everything most people chased for a lifetime. A Yale MBA, leadership of Bennett Global Industries, and a personal fortune nearing $4 billion. Yet she was kneeling on the marble floor of the Kenneth mansion, quietly scrubbing as though her existence were no greater than the soap bubbles dissolving beneath her hands. The polished stone reflected a warped version of her face, a stranger she had carefully created. For 3 weeks she had trained herself to disappear. Natural hair hidden under a plain scarf, no makeup, a bargain uniform chosen for its forgettable dullness. Servants were meant to be unseen. Julli Kenneth, however, always noticed, not with kindness, but with the detached appraisal one gives an object that disappoints. The Mafia wife strode past in sharp heels, laughing into her phone, then paused to invent a flaw on the spotless floor. When Marie offered no apology, Julli's expression shifted into something colder, more deliberate. With sugary cruelty, she invited the Maid to an exclusive charity gala, clearly expecting humiliation to be the evening's entertainment. Laughter spilled from her fashionable friends nearby. Marie simply kept cleaning, outwardly silent. Inside though, she was already picturing a midnight black couture gown waiting in her private wardrobe, a masterpiece worth more than the room itself. Saturday would not unfold the way they imagined. Before we dive deeper into this story, click the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from in the comment section. If this story moves you, share it with someone who loves a good tale. Remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. 3 months earlier, Marie had walked through the service entrance of the Kenneth mansion carrying a bucket of cleaning supplies and a cover story so airtight it had taken her legal team 2 full weeks to construct. The uniform was scratchy and unflattering. The headscarf was plain. She didn't care about either of those things. She was there for $200 million. Bennett Global Industries had been approached by Tamman Kenneth's luxury hotel chain, the Kenneth Collection, for a strategic partnership that would reshape the company's footprint across 3 continents. The proposal was ambitious. The numbers were impressive. On paper, every metric aligned. But Marie had built Bennett Global on a single non-negotiable principle. She verified everything herself personally before she committed. Her legal team had flagged unusual cash movement through Kenneth's European properties, not enough to kill the deal outright, but enough to create a specific and serious unease. She needed to know what was actually happening inside this house before she put her company's name behind it. So she did what she always did when the answer wasn't available through conventional channels. She went and looked for it herself. The cover identity had taken 2 weeks to build properly. A new cleaning service contract had been arranged through a shell company with zero traceable connection to Bennett Global. Marie Bennett became Marie Okafor, a new hire from a hospitality staffing agency, quiet, efficient, and entirely unremarkable. Her real identity existed publicly and thoroughly on the internet. The press conferences, the Forbes profiles, the Senate committee appearances. It was all there for anyone who thought to search. But no one in this house was going to look up the new Maid. That was not how people like Julli Kenneth occupied their time. That was precisely what Marie was counting on. For the first 2 weeks, she moved through the mansion with the deliberate invisibility of someone who had studied what it meant to be overlooked and had decided to use it as a tool. She listened. She cataloged. She built a mental map of the household's rhythms with the same methodical attention she applied to financial modeling. What she found surprised her. Tamman Kenneth ran a disciplined, professional operation. His staff were treated with genuine respect, compensated well, and spoke about him in the quiet, unforced way that real loyalty sounds. Nothing performative, nothing forced. The financial irregularity she had come to investigate turned out to be the remnants of his father's arrangements with 3 shell structures. Old, dirty money that Tamman had been methodically dismantling for 4 years. He wasn't generating new exposure. He was cleaning up inherited damage. The deal was sound. But the marriage was something else entirely. Julli Kenneth was the fullest expression of something Marie had observed in many rooms over many years. A person who had received status without earning it, and who exercised the resulting power exclusively in one direction, downward. She dismissed household staff mid-sentence. She returned meals to the kitchen with theatrical disappointment. She referred to the people who maintained her home as the help, as though they were a category rather than a collection of individuals with full lives, families, and private dignities. Kindly click the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from in the comment section. Marie spoke to the staff quietly in the margins of the workday, a question here, a moment of shared silence there, building a portrait piece by piece. Mrs. Park, the head housekeeper, was a formidable woman in her 60s who ran the domestic operations with the precision of a seasoned executive and the patience of someone who had seen everything and survived it all. She never said anything explicitly negative about Julli. She didn't need to. Her jaw tightened every time the name came up, and that small, involuntary movement told Marie everything she needed to know. She kept her head down and her attention sharp. She had come here for the financial data. She stayed because she had begun to understand that the story unfolding in this household was about something much older and much less forgiving than money. The invitation arrived on a Thursday, during the kind of morning where the house felt like it was holding its breath. Marie was polishing the banister on the second-floor landing when she heard Julli's voice rising from the formal sitting room below. Not in anger, but in the particular elevated brightness that Julli reserved for moments when she was about to perform cruelty for a receptive audience. Her friends had arrived for their weekly brunch. 3 women with interchangeable expressions, settled into the sitting room with the ease of people who had never had to think twice about where they belonged. Marie continued polishing, her cloth moving in slow, steady arcs. "I've decided to make this Saturday's gala truly memorable," Julli was saying, with the precise projection of someone who wanted to be overheard. "I'm going to invite the maid." A moment of silence. Then laughter. "Which one?" someone asked. "The new one. The quiet one. She never says anything, she just scrubs things and stares. It's quite unsettling, honestly." Julli's voice dropped into the register she used when she wanted to appear generous. "I thought it might be a valuable experience for her. To see how things are done at a certain level. Exposure. These people sometimes just need exposure to understand what's possible." The laughter that followed was full and genuine, which was the most damning thing about it. Marie's cloth moved in even circles. 20 minutes later, Julli appeared at the foot of the staircase and looked up with the bright, satisfied expression of someone who has set something in motion and is pleased with themselves. "Marie," she said it the way you call something that can't answer back. "I want you to come to the gala Saturday evening. 8 o'clock. The Grand Palais Ballroom on 5th. Her smile had the quality of something sharp wrapped in silk. "Wear your best. It'll be such fun." She turned and walked away before there was any opportunity to respond. The invitation was not a kindness and had never been intended as one. It was the first line of a story Julli was already composing. The story she would tell for years about the maid who actually showed up, thinking she belonged. Marie watched her go. She thought about Versace. Then she thought about the Cartier diamond set locked in her penthouse safe in New York. $2.3 million of stones purchased at auction 3 years ago from the estate of a European countess. Worn perhaps twice annually, at events where Marie's presence alone changed the energy of the room the moment she entered. She returned to the banister. But something inside her had settled into a new configuration, and it had nothing to do with the business deal anymore. It was Dave who found her first. Dave Reyes had served as head of security at the Kenneth estate for 11 years. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with quiet, watchful eyes and the particular stillness of someone trained to observe everything while appearing to observe nothing at all. He had spent 8 years with a federal agency before coming to work for the Kenneths, and the instincts built during those years had not faded. He knew every camera angle on the property. He knew which rooms were swept for surveillance and which weren't. He knew the household secrets the way old houses know their own structural weaknesses, not because anyone had told him, but because he had been present long enough that the truth had accumulated around him like sediment. He stopped Marie in the east corridor near the garden entrance on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 days before the gala. "Walk with me," he said, not a request. They went outside into the kitchen garden, where the sound of the groundskeeping equipment would cover their conversation. Dave studied her for a moment. Then, without preamble or drama, he said, "I know who you are, Ms. Bennett." Marie's expression did not change. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." He almost allowed himself a smile. "I lifted your prints from a water glass in your second week here. I ran them against a private database I've maintained since my time with the agency." He paused. "Your cover is genuinely excellent. But you smiled the first time you walked past Mr. Kenneth's library, and you only smile when you see good architecture. I looked up the buildings you've commissioned." Marie was quiet. "Mr. Kenneth is aware as well," Dave continued. "Has been for approximately 2 weeks. He instructed me not to say anything to Mrs. Kenneth." He met her eyes. His exact words were that it would be a shame to spoil what he suspected was coming. He extended a card, his personal number. "Whatever you need between now and Saturday, you call that number. At any hour." He glanced toward the house. "Mrs. Park is in as well. She has been waiting 11 years for something resembling this." He walked back inside. Marie stood in the kitchen garden for a long moment, looking at the card in her hand. The afternoon light fell in long warm strips across the raised herb beds. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, the city continued doing what cities do. Indifferent, enormous, full of people who had no idea what was being quietly prepared inside this house. She took out her phone and made a call. It was past midnight when Tamman found her. Marie was alone in the staff kitchen, the vast professional space that stayed lit throughout the night. Sitting at the long wooden table with a cup of cooling tea and a financial analysis she was not technically authorized to possess but had photographed from the estate office the previous afternoon. She looked up when the door opened and gave herself exactly half a second to assess whether concealment was the right move. She decided it wasn't. Tamman Kenneth entered with the particular weight of a man who had stopped pretending to be unburdened. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a plain white shirt with the sleeves rolled back, moving through the kitchen with the ease of someone who had grown up in spaces like this and felt no need to perform comfort in them. He looked at the document on the table. He looked at her face. He poured himself a glass of water and sat down across from her without ceremony. "That's the Zurich property analysis," he said. 2019 figures. "Yes," Marie said. "The irregularities in it originated with 3 shell arrangements my father established in the early 2000s. I've spent 4 years untangling the structure. The final tranche clears through a regulatory audit in March." He looked at her with level, unhurried directness. "I suspect you've already pieced most of that together." "Enough of it," she said. He nodded once. "Bennett Global would be a strong partner for the Kenneth collection. I believe you've reached the same conclusion." He set his glass down. "I also believe you came here expecting to find a criminal enterprise and found something considerably more complicated." She studied him. "What did you find on your side of this?" He was quiet for a moment, genuinely quiet, not performing thought. "Someone I wasn't expecting," he said simply. It was the most honest sentence anyone in this household had spoken aloud since she arrived. She felt something shift very slightly inside her chest. Not sentimentally but structurally, the way a building settles when the ground beneath it finds its permanent configuration. They sat in that kitchen until nearly 2 in the morning. They talked about the hotel properties in detail, the European portfolio, the regulatory landscape, what sustainable compliance actually required at scale. They talked about what ethical business looked like in industries that had historically served as cover for far worse operations. Tamman Kenneth was widely read, analytically precise, and deeply tired of performing a version of himself that didn't correspond to who he actually was. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, he said things he meant. When Marie finally pushed back her chair to leave, he said, without looking up from his glass, "My wife has invited you to the gala." "She has." He met her eyes then. "Go," he said. "Go and be exactly who you are." He found her the following morning in the corridor outside the library. Julli was at her tennis lesson. The house had the particular released quality of a place temporarily freed from a pressure it had become too accustomed to notice. Tamman stood with the direct, settled posture of a man who has made a decision he has no intention of walking back. "I owe you a complete conversation before Saturday," he said. "Not the version I give to business partners. The actual one." He opened the library door and she followed him inside. What came next was not a confession. It was something more considered, a deliberate, comprehensive inventory. He talked about the nature of his marriage, a strategic arrangement made a decade ago that had calcified, over time, into mutual performance and private disdain. He talked about the staff members Julli had driven away over the years, the housekeepers who had left crying, the incident with the sous chef that had required a confidential settlement, the way the energy in every room changed measurably and immediately when his wife was in residence. He described the household's atmosphere with the precision of someone who had been documenting damage quietly for a long time and had never had anyone worth telling it to. Then he looked at Marie with complete steadiness and said, "I want you to walk into that gala and make it impossible for her to pretend, not for my sake. For Mrs. Park, who has worked in this house for 11 years and has never once been addressed by her first name. For the girl in the kitchen who cried alone in her room every night for 2 weeks after Julli told her she moved like a cow. For every person who has been made to feel like an object in the place where they work. For all of them." Marie held his gaze. "That's a significant weight to carry into a charity event." "You're the right person to carry it," he said, without hesitation and without softness, stated as a fact he had already verified. When she left the library, she stood for a moment in the corridor with her back against the wall and her eyes closed. She had walked through the Kenneth service entrance 3 months ago to evaluate a $200 million business deal. She had found something that felt older and less reducible than money, something that reminded her why she had built Bennett Global in the first place, and what it was supposed to stand for. She took out her phone and called New York. "Get the Versace out of storage," she said, "and call Cartier directly. I need the full diamond suite here by Friday evening." A beat. Yes, the entire set. All of it. The 48 hours before the gala moved with the restrained, building intensity of the period directly before a major storm. Everything on the surface appearing calm, the pressure accumulating beneath. Marie worked her regular shifts with the same frictionless efficiency she had maintained across 3 months. She cleaned. She polished. She managed linen inventories. Julli passed her twice on Friday morning and each time delivered the same expression. The bright, anticipatory look of someone who has engineered a humiliation and is counting the hours until it lands. It was the look of a person who had confused the absence of resistance with the absence of power. Marie returned it with absolute calm. She had spent years in rooms designed to make her feel like the wrong person in the right position. Boardrooms, Senate chambers, negotiations where the other side had decided before she sat down that she could be managed. She had developed, through necessity and repetition, the ability to make her face give back nothing. She gave Julli nothing to read. That afternoon, Mrs. Park found her in the linen room and stood in the doorway for a long moment without speaking. The kind of silence that two people share when they both understand what is happening and neither of them needs to explain it. "Dave told me," Mrs. Park said quietly. "Not everything. Enough to understand." Marie turned to look at her. 11 years. The older woman said it without performance, without self-pity, the way you state a number that represents something you have carried a long time and not complained about. "I stay because Mr. Kenneth runs a house worth staying in, and because this staff needs someone who won't leave." But 11 years. She straightened with the posture of someone who has made peace with exactly how they want to occupy space. "Whatever is planned for Saturday, you don't owe it to me. But I want you to understand that it matters. Not just to me. To all of us." Marie looked at her steadily. "It matters to me too," she said. The Versace arrived Friday evening in a matte black garment box packed in white tissue, delivered by a woman whose entire professional function was ensuring that nothing entrusted to her arrived late or damaged. The Cartier suite came 40 minutes later, the cascade of stones Marie had acquired at auction from a European estate, a piece of jewelry significant enough that its arrival had required a dedicated courier, 2 forms of insurance documentation, and a handoff that Dave had quietly arranged to occur without Julli's knowledge. Marie hung the dress in her room in the staff quarters. In the low light, the fabric did something unusual. It didn't simply absorb the light but seemed to metabolize it, to take the available darkness and give back something concentrated and deliberate. She sat for a while and thought about what Tamman had said. "Be exactly who you are." She had started Bennett Global with $40,000 and a spreadsheet. She had walked into rooms where the people across the table had decided before she arrived that she was a placeholder, someone to be managed, redirected, or gently removed from the conversation. She had allowed those assumptions to stand every time, because an underestimated person in possession of real capability is sitting on the most significant asymmetry in any negotiation. The moment you corrected the assumption was the only moment that mattered. Everything prior was reconnaissance. She had been conducting reconnaissance for 3 months. Saturday was the correction. The Grand Palais Ballroom was everything that kind of room always is, a monument to the aesthetic of wealth at scale, chandeliers dropping amber light across 500 guests in couture and conversation, the air layered with perfume and the particular sound of money talking to itself. It was beautiful in the way that rooms designed to exclude people are always beautiful. Marie arrived at 8:15. The car Dave had arranged was a black Rolls-Royce Phantom. He stood near the entrance in his professional capacity, and when he saw her step out onto the pavement he permitted himself the smallest and most controlled expression of satisfaction that a man of his discipline could allow. She stepped into the light. The dress registered first, midnight fabric that moved with a kind of liquid precision, every seam placed with architectural intention, the kind of garment that communicated before its wearer said a single word. The Cartier diamonds at her throat and wrists fractured the light into a scatter of brilliance that the human eye pursues involuntarily, the way it pursues fire, the way it pursues the thing in a room that has decided to be seen. Her hair was fully, gloriously out, the crown she had suppressed under plain linen for 3 months, free now and enormous and entirely itself. She walked through the entrance. The room shifted. Not dramatically, she had not come to create theater, and the shift was more interesting than drama anyway. It was a ripple, moving outward from the point of her arrival in every direction. Heads turning in sequence, the low current of recognition spreading person to person through the crowd, people leaning toward one another with the particular posture of someone who has just realized they know that face from somewhere important. She had appeared on the cover of Forbes 3 separate times. She had rung the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. She had given testimony before a Senate subcommittee that had been quoted in 7 subsequent legislative sessions. The people in this room operated at the level where such things were not trivia, they were coordinates. She walked toward Julli Kenneth, who was standing near the champagne bar with her usual circle, laughing at something with her back most of the way to the entrance. One of the friends saw Marie first. The friend's expression collapsed through several registers in approximately 1 second. Confusion, then the specific blankness of someone whose mental model has just failed to load, then a recognition that arrived like cold water, then an urgent sideways nudge that required no translation. Julli turned. The silence that opened between them lasted perhaps 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, Marie watched the understanding move across Julli Kenneth's face in slow, merciless stages. First uncertainty, then the long moment of disbelief, then the recognition she could not prevent, then the particular horror of a person who has realized simultaneously that they have made a catastrophic mistake and that there is absolutely nowhere to go. Marie stopped 3 feet in front of her. "Julli," she said warmly, "thank you so much for the invitation. You were right, it's a stunning event." The revelation was not a speech. It was a presence, and that distinction was everything. Julli's circle had perhaps prepared in the back of their minds for confrontation, accusations that could be denied, drama that could be absorbed and subsequently narrated. What they received was something far harder to deflect. Marie Bennett existed, fully and without apology, in the space she was entitled to occupy, and the room recognized her before she said a single word about who she was. Recognition that arrived publicly and organically was not something social maneuver could address. Within 90 seconds, the honorary gala chair, a senator's husband who also sat on the Bennett Global Advisory Board, appeared at her side with the warmth of a long-standing personal acquaintance, speaking loud enough to carry. Within 3 minutes, the arts philanthropist who chaired a foundation Marie had funded arrived from across the room. The event photographer understood immediately what was unfolding and positioned himself accordingly. Julli Kenneth stood in the center of all of it, still holding a champagne flute she was no longer drinking from, watching the gravitational center of the room migrate to a woman she had invited as the evening's joke. Later in the program, Marie was asked if she would say a few words during the charity presentation. She accepted. She was brief, precise, and generous, the way people are when they don't need an audience to confirm their authority. She spoke about the housing initiative at the center of the evening's fundraising with genuine specificity that made clear she had read the organization's annual reports rather than skimming a summary. She announced the Bennett Global Partnership with the Kenneth Collection in the matter-of-fact tone of someone reading confirmed data, and thanked Tamman publicly for the integrity and vision that had made the deal possible. Then she made a second announcement. A personal commitment of $1.5 million to the charity's endowment, dedicated, she said this clearly, looking out at the room with complete composure, to the hospitality workers who made every hotel, every event, every charity gala possible. The housekeepers and kitchen staff and security officers. The people who were always present and almost never acknowledged. She stepped back from the microphone to immediate, sustained applause. Julli Kenneth's friends located reasons to be in other parts of the ballroom. They moved with impressive efficiency, given how long they had been her reliable audience. Julli stood alone for the first time that evening, still holding the untouched glass, wearing the expression of someone who has watched a thing they believe to be permanent come quietly and completely down. The aftermath arrived with the calm inevitability of a tide that has decided to go out. Julli Kenneth's social exile was not theatrical. It was simply that, over the following weeks, calls stopped being returned. Invitations ceased to arrive. The circle of friends, who had laughed in the doorway of the Kenneth mansion, whose manicures Marie had seen from the second-floor landing, contracted with remarkable speed as each woman performed her own private calculation and determined that the cost of proximity outweighed the benefit of loyalty. Within 3 weeks, the isolation was complete. Julli noticed. She said nothing that would have made it better. The divorce filing arrived in the 4th week. Tamman's legal team was thorough, unhurried, and fair, which was the detail Julli had least expected and found most difficult to locate a response to. She had prepared for warfare. She received an open door, handled with quiet dignity, which turned out to be a far more definitive kind of ending. Tamman moved with calm, focused purpose in the months that followed. He engaged a new compliance firm. He opened the European properties to a full independent audit, the kind his father would never have permitted. The historical funds that had traveled through the disputed structures were once fully unwound, directed to the 3 communities his father's operations had materially damaged. None of this was announced. It was simply done. Marie learned about each action through her due diligence team's reports, which she read with the same focused attention she brought to every document. She approved the partnership. The first call between them as equal business partners ran 3 hours and ranged across every continent where the Kenneth collection operated. They disagreed directly and productively about brand positioning strategy. They reached quick and complete consensus on infrastructure investment priorities. Twice, in the pauses between agenda items, they laughed about things that had nothing to do with business. And those were, Marie reflected afterward, the 2 most clarifying moments of the entire conversation. He called the following week. Not about the business. She took the call. Mrs. Park retired in the spring, 6 months after the gala. A severance package arrived from an anonymous source that was, by any measure, significantly more than the minimum. She purchased a small house in the south of France and once she was settled, sent Marie a single postcard. A photograph of herself on a sunlit terrace with a glass of wine and an expression of complete, unhurried peace. Marie kept it on her desk, next to the framed financial close sheet from the Kenneth partnership. The Bennett Hospitality Dignity Foundation launched its programs across 15 cities in its first year. Wage supplementation, mental health resources, and legal support for service industry workers who had historically had access to none of those things. The founding director was a woman who had served as Marie's executive assistant for 6 years and who turned out, when given a real mandate and real resources, to be a gifted organizational architect. Marie gave her a corner office and an annual budget and stayed out of her way. On a Tuesday evening in late October, Marie and Tamman had dinner together for the first time as themselves. No cover story, no investigation, no negotiation required. The restaurant was quiet and unhurried. The conversation moved the way good conversations do, without an agenda, from one honest thing to the next, following whatever thread seemed most interesting without the need to arrive anywhere specific. He told her that she had looked frightening walking into that gala. She told him she had been entirely calm. He studied her for a moment. Then he smiled, slowly, with the particular warmth of someone who has been waiting a long time to find reason to. "I know," he said. That was exactly the problem. She thought about that on the drive home. About what it meant to move through the world in full possession of yourself. Not performing it, not projecting it, just carrying it with the same steady care you'd carry anything genuinely valuable. About how many rooms she had entered over the years carrying everything she was, and had chosen, deliberately and strategically, to let people see only the fraction she decided to reveal. About the specific discipline required to absorb someone's contempt without internalizing their assessment. To be underestimated without becoming diminished by the experience. She had learned something in those 3 months in the Kenneth mansion that boardrooms and Senate hearings and Forbes profiles had never quite managed to teach her. That dignity does not require an audience to exist. It is not conferred by a $3 million dress or an MBA or a company valuation. It had been present every morning when she tied the headscarf and lifted the bucket. It had been present in Mrs. Park's jaw, tightening with 11 years of accumulated restraint every time a name came up. It had been present in the girl who cried in her room at night and appeared, without fail, in the kitchen the following morning, because showing up, when everything in the environment communicates that you do not matter, is its own irreducible form of integrity. The dress had not given Marie her power. The dress had simply made the power legible to people who had been too comfortable in their assumptions to read what was already plainly there. That was all a grand entrance ever was. A translation for people who hadn't been paying attention. And here, finally, is the question the story is actually asking, not of Marie and not of Julli Kenneth, but of every person who has stayed with it until the end. The subject of this narrative is not revenge. Revenge is just the surface event. What the story is actually about is the human habit of assigning value based on visibility. What someone wears, where they stand in a room, what task they happen to be performing at the precise moment of observation. Julli Kenneth is not a villain from another species. She is the predictable output of a social system that rewards fast classification, that treats status markers as evidence of intelligence, and that has never required anyone to sit with the discomfort of discovering they misjudged someone completely. Most of us run a version of that same algorithm at some level every day, sorting people quickly, efficiently, and often incorrectly, based on whatever signals are most immediately available. The question worth carrying into your own week, your own workplace, your own daily decisions is this: who are you stepping over right now? What does the person managing your logistics, cleaning your office, answering your calls, or preparing your food know that you haven't thought to ask? The most significant intelligence in any room is rarely the loudest voice in it. It operates most of the time quietly. and it is almost always watching.